Section 1. The time travel. The operation began at 2:01 a.m. local time on Tuesday, January 3rd, 2026. 4 U.S. Delta Force helicopters, call signs Reaper 1 through Reaper 4, touched down at the presidential compound in Caracas, Venezuela. 18 minutes later, President Nicolás Maduro was in U.S. custody. By 4:37 a.m., American forces controlled every major government building in the capital. The media called it Operation Absolute Resolve. The official justification: narco-terrorism, human rights violations, securing regional stability. The financial press added another angle. Venezuela sits on 4.1 billion tons of iron ore reserves in the Orinoco mining arc. Strategic materials, national security, securing critical supply chains. All of that is a lie. Here's what actually happened. At 6:14 a.m., 3 hours and 13 minutes after Delta Force secured the presidential compound, a detachment of U.S. Army Rangers breached the Central Bank of Venezuela's vault facility in downtown Caracas. They were looking for 850 tons of refined silver. Intelligence reports, later leaked to Reuters by a State Department official who has since disappeared from public record, confirmed that Venezuelan state mining operations had been refining and stockpiling silver since 2019. The strategic reserve was estimated at 847 to 892 tons. At current prices, that's $194 billion worth of physical metal. But in a world where China just banned silver exports 72 hours earlier, on January 1st, 2026, that 847 tons wasn't worth $194 billion. It was worth everything. When the Rangers opened the vault at 6:41 a.m., they found 3 tons. 3. The rest was gone. If you're watching this, understand that the global supply chain for strategic metals has already broken. The transfer has begun. Subscribe to Stage 4, because what I am about to show you is not a warning. It is a historical record of the heist that just guaranteed Stage 4 is irreversible. Today is Friday, January 6th, 2026. 72 hours ago, the United States military executed the largest resource seizure operation since the invasion of Iraq, and they were too late. Section 2. The cover-up. Let me show you the lie they're selling. On January 3rd at 11:47 a.m. Eastern, 7 hours after boots hit the ground in Caracas, the White House press secretary issued a statement. Operation Absolute Resolve was conducted to neutralize an imminent threat to regional security posed by the Maduro narco regime. This action protects American interests and upholds our commitment to democracy in the Western Hemisphere. By 3 RPM, every major news network was running the same story. Venezuela's involvement in cocaine trafficking, humanitarian concerns, the need to stabilize a failed state. By 6 RPM, the financial media added the economic angle. Venezuela possesses the world's second largest iron ore reserves, 4.1 billion tons located in the Orinoco mining arc, critical for steel production, essential for infrastructure, a strategic resource that cannot be left in the hands of a hostile regime aligned with China and Russia. None of this is technically false, but none of it is the reason for the invasion. Let me show you what they're not telling you about the Orinoco mining arc. The region encompasses 111,843 square kilometers in southeastern Venezuela. The media focuses on iron ore because it sounds industrial, boring, non-controversial. But buried in the same geological surveys, specifically the 2021 Venezuelan Ministry of Mining Report, document VMM 2021, 0847, page 394, subsection 7.2, are the following reserve estimates. Gold, 7,132 metric tons, proven and probable reserves. Coltan, 891,000 metric tons, essential for semiconductors and capacitors. Silver, 12,400 metric tons in-ground reserves, with 847 tons already refined and held in state reserves. That 847 tons of refined silver, that's 27.2 million troy ounces. At $71 per ounce, the current spot price as of this morning, January 6th, that's $194 billion. But here's what makes that number meaningless. There is no available supply at $71. China controls 38% of global refined silver production. On January 1st, 2026, they implemented Export Regulation 2026-011, suspending all silver exports to non-BRICS nations indefinitely. Russia controls another 9% of global production, also embargoed. Peru, the world's second largest producer, just announced on January 4th that domestic industrial demand will consume their entire 2026 output. No exports available. So when the United States intelligence community identified 847 tons of refined, vault-stored, immediately accessible silver sitting in Caracas, they didn't see 1.94 billion. They saw the only remaining source of physical metal in the Western Hemisphere that could supply U.S. defense contractors for the next 14 months. The F-35 fighter jet requires 1,147 grams of silver per aircraft. The U.S. has orders for 389 F-35s scheduled for delivery in 2026 and 2027. That's 485 on 183 grams, 485 kilograms of silver. The Aegis missile defense system uses 3,890 grams per unit. Current production schedule, 127 units in 2026. Naval destroyers, satellite systems, avionics, guidance computers, all require silver, all currently facing a supply shortage that cannot be solved by printing dollars. This wasn't a military operation to remove a dictator. This was a resource seizure disguised as regime change. And when the Rangers opened the vault on January 3rd at 6:41 a.m. and found only 3 tons remaining, they discovered something far worse than an empty vault. They discovered they'd been beaten. Section 3, the Heist timeline. Let me show you exactly what happened in the 72 hours before Operation Absolute Resolve. December 31st, 2025, 11:34 p.m. local time, Caracas. Satellite imagery from the National Reconnaissance Office, declassified accidentally in a State Department FOIA response on January 5th, shows unusual activity at Simon Bolivar International Airport. Specifically, the arrival of aircraft not on any commercial flight manifest. Between 11:47 p.m. on December 31st and 2:47 a.m. on January 1st, 4 Russian Antonov and 124 cargo planes landed at the airport. These are not commercial aircraft. The An-124 is a strategic military transport capable of carrying 150 metric tons of cargo. Flight tracking data, later confirmed by Brazilian air traffic control recordings, shows these aircraft departed Venezuelan airspace at 8:41 a.m. on January 1st. Destination? Undisclosed. Flight paths terminated over the Atlantic, suggesting they shut off transponders after leaving monitored airspace. The official cargo manifest filed with Venezuelan customs, mining equipment, and industrial machinery. But here's what satellite thermal imaging revealed. The cargo loading process at Caracas took place at the central bank vault facility, not at any mining operation, and the weight distribution analysis conducted by NRO thermographic sensors indicated a cargo density consistent with refined metals, not machinery. Between 2:47 a.m. and 8:41 a.m. on January 1st, those 4 Antonov aircraft loaded and departed with an estimated 340 to 380 tons of cargo. But the Russians weren't alone. On January the 2nd, just 24 hours before U.S. forces landed, 2 additional aircraft arrived. Chinese state carrier registry, identified as Shanxi Y-20 strategic airlifters. These aircraft have a cargo capacity of 66 tons each. They landed at 3:12 a.m. They departed at 9:47 a.m. Flight path, direct to Cuba, then across the Atlantic. Transponders disabled after leaving Cuban airspace. When you add the Russian Antonov flights and the Chinese Y-20 flights, the total cargo capacity removed from Venezuela in those 72 hours is between 472 and 512 tons. But U.S. intelligence estimated the Venezuelan silver reserve at 847 tons, which means there should have been 335 to 375 tons remaining when Delta Force arrived on January 3rd. They found 3 tons. Let me be specific about what this means. Someone knew that the United States was planning Operation Absolute Resolve. Someone knew the exact timing. And someone evacuated 844 tons of refined silver in a 72-hour window, leaving just enough in the vault to avoid suspicion until it was too late. The leaked State Department memo, reference SD 2026-0119, dated January 4th, includes a single line buried on page 18. Asset denial successful. Strategic material relocated to BRICS custody prior to U.S. asset seizure. Operational failure confirmed. Operational failure. 847 tons of silver, 27 million ounces. Gone. And here's the detail that should terrify you. This wasn't improvised. You don't coordinate Russian and Chinese strategic airlift operations in 72 hours. You don't move 847 tons of refined metal without pre-positioned logistics, security, and receiving facilities on the other end. This was planned, months in advance, which means they knew the United States would eventually be desperate enough to invade Venezuela for silver. They just made sure there wouldn't be any silver left when the U.S. arrived. The United States now controls Venezuelan territory, but China and Russia control the metal. Section 4, the undeniable math. Now, let me show you why those 847 tons matter. Global silver consumption in 2025, 1.2 billion ounces. Global silver mine production in 2025, 822 million ounces. Annual structural deficit, 378 million ounces. That deficit has been filled, barely, by above-ground stockpiles, recycling, and strategic reserves held by governments and central banks. But here's the problem. Those stockpiles are depleting. The London Bullion Market Association reported in December 2025 that registered silver inventories in LBMA vaults had fallen to 892 million ounces, the lowest level since 2016. COMEX registered silver, 47 million ounces. As of January 5th, 2026, and now 27 million ounces, the entire Venezuelan strategic reserve just left Western custody permanently. Let me make this concrete. U.S. industrial silver demand for 2026 is projected at 217 million ounces. Solar panel manufacturing, 54 million ounces. Electronics and semiconductors, 41 million ounces. Military and defense, 38 million ounces. Medical equipment, 27 million ounces. Other industrial applications, 57 million ounces. With China's export ban in effect as of January 1st, the United States has lost access to 78 million ounces of annual supply that was coming from Chinese refineries. With Peru redirecting output to domestic consumption, that's another 43 million ounces unavailable. Total supply lost, 121 million ounces. And now, the one remaining stockpile in the Western Hemisphere that could have bridged that gap, the 27 million ounces in Venezuela, is gone. The mathematics are terminal. U.S. demand, 217 million ounces. Available supply after embargoes, 96 million ounces. Deficit, 121 million ounces with no available source at any price. This isn't a market imbalance that corrects itself. This is a structural supply failure. And it's not just the United States. The European Union consumes 189 million ounces annually. With the same embargo restrictions, they're facing an 87 million ounce deficit. Japan, 52 million ounce deficit. South Korea, 31 million ounce deficit. The entire Western industrial base is now competing for a shrinking pool of available silver, while the primary producers, China, Russia, and now Venezuela's reserves, have been removed from the market. Here's what happens next. Not speculation, but mathematical certainty. Phase 1, current, February 2026. Industrial users burn through existing inventory. Solar manufacturers, electronics companies, and defense contractors operate normally but begin extending lead times. Phase 2, May 2026. Inventories deplete. Spot shortages appear. Prices spike. But physical metal becomes unavailable even at elevated prices. The paper price and the physical price diverge, just like we saw with gold in 2020. Phase 3, September 2026. Production halts. First, solar, SunPower, and other manufacturers suspend operations. Defense contractors notify the Pentagon that weapons system production is compromised. The strategic implications become undeniable. Phase 4, October 2026 onward. The government is forced to choose ration silver to military applications only, abandoning civilian industry, or print dollars to bid against China for the remaining global supply, accelerating currency debasement. Either choice leads to stage 4. Either choice confirms that the transfer is complete, because here's the reality they don't want you to understand. You cannot print commodities. The Federal Reserve can create $2 trillion in new currency with a keystroke, but they cannot create a single ounce of silver. And when the primary supplier of that silver, China, decides to embargo exports, and when the last remaining Western stockpile, Venezuela, gets evacuated 72 hours before you can seize it, you discover that all the dollars in the world are worthless if there's nothing to buy with them. This is the lesson of stage 4. Paper is a claim. Commodities are reality. And when the claims exceed the reality, the mathematics resolve themselves violently. Section 5. The stage 4. Conclusion. Let me summarize what just happened. On January 3rd, 2026, at 2:01 a.m., the United States military executed the largest resource seizure operation in modern history. The official justification? Narco-terrorism, regional stability, humanitarian intervention. The actual target, 847 tons of refined silver, 27 million ounces, stockpiled in the central bank of Venezuela. The result? When U.S. forces breached the vault, they found 3 tons. The rest had been evacuated by Russian and Chinese aircraft in the 72 hours before the invasion. The United States now controls Venezuelan territory, but China and Russia control the metal. And that metal represents the last significant Western accessible silver reserve that could have bridged the supply deficit created by China's January 1st export embargo. It's gone. Here's what this means for you. If you work in solar energy, your industry just lost its supply chain. If you work in electronics manufacturing, your production costs are about to spike by 140 to 180%. If you hold a 401k invested in technology or renewable energy stocks, you're holding equity in companies that can no longer source their critical inputs. And if you're waiting for the government to fix this, if you believe the Federal Reserve can print its way out of a commodity shortage, you haven't been paying attention to the pattern. The pattern says, when governments reach the limits of monetary policy, they seize resources. The United States just tried, and they failed, because China executed the exact same strategy first, and did it better. Now let me show you the timeline of what's coming. January, February 2026. Denial. The media will claim this is temporary. Supply chains will adjust. Alternative sources will emerge. Markets will stabilize. March, May 2026. Recognition. Industrial production slowdowns become undeniable. Prices spike. Shortages appear in civilian markets. June, August 2026. Panic. The paper-silver market collapses as holders try to convert to physical and discover there is no physical available. ETFs suspend redemptions. The divergence between paper and physical becomes a chasm. September-December 2026. Capitulation. The government implements rationing. Strategic industries get priority access. Civilian applications are abandoned. The stock market reprices to reflect a world without reliable access to critical materials. 2027, Stage 4. The transfer is complete. Those who held paper wealth have been liquidated. Those who held physical assets have consolidated. This is not a prediction. This is the pattern. The pattern has never been wrong. The 847-ton heist wasn't a theft. It was a transfer. From west to east. From paper to physical. From the old system to the new. And you just watched it happen in real time. The window to acquire physical metal is closing. Not in some distant future. Right now. When this Venezuelan silver reserve was still intact, there was at least a theoretical path to bridging the supply gap. That path no longer exists. When China's embargo was announced on January 1st, there was still 72 hours to react. That window closed on January 3rd at 8:41 a.m. when the last Chinese aircraft left Venezuelan airspace. What remains now is not an opportunity. What remains is the final liquidation phase, when the majority realizes the scarcity and panics into a market that has no supply. Subscribe to Stage 4 because this channel exists for one purpose: to document the collapse in real time so that when the history books are written, there is a record of exactly how this happened. Not in theory, not in retrospect, but as it was happening. 847 tons of silver just disappeared from Western custody. The mathematics of the supply deficit are now irreversible. Stage 4 is no longer coming. Stage 4 is here, and the only question left is whether you'll survive the transfer. I'll see you on the other side.